I stood in the courthouse bathroom, staring at my reflection while my hands shook uncontrollably. In my purse was the evidence that would destroy my uncle's life in exactly 15 minutes. Had I become the very monster I was trying to expose? When my grandmother died 6 months ago, I thought grief would be the hardest part of moving forward. I never imagined I'd uncover a family betrayal so deep it would change everything I believed about the people who raised me. My name is Catherine Mills. I'm 35 years old, and until recently I thought I knew what family meant. I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, in a house that smelled like sweet tea and jasmine. My grandmother, Eleanor Mills, raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8. She was more than a grandmother. She was my rock, my confidant, and my best friend. Uncle Richard, my father's older brother, lived across town with his wife, Diane. They never had children, which Uncle Richard often said was a blessing in disguise, with a laugh that always made me uncomfortable. He visited us every Sunday for dinner, bringing expensive wine that he drank mostly by himself, while complaining about his real estate business. Growing up, I always felt Uncle Richard resented me. He'd make comments about how expensive my school was or how much easier life would be if my grandmother didn't have extra responsibilities. But Grandma always defended me, saying, "Catherine is not a responsibility, Richard. She's the joy of my life." Grandma owned a historic home in Charleston's Battery District that had been in our family for generations. It was worth millions, not just for the property, but for the antiques and art collected over a century. She also had investments my grandfather had made before his death that had grown substantially over the years. Uncle Richard always seemed more interested in her assets than in her health. When Grandma was diagnosed with cancer last year, I moved back home from Atlanta to take care of her. I'd been working as an archivist at a museum there, but nothing mattered more than being with her in her final months. Uncle Richard visited more frequently during this time, often when I wasn't home, bringing paperwork for her to sign. "Just boring financial updates," he'd say whenever I asked. "Nothing for you to worry about." After Grandma passed away, I was devastated. The funeral was small, as she wanted, but the hole she left in my life felt enormous. A week later, we all gathered at Mr. Peterson's office, the family attorney who had worked with my grandparents for decades. He was a small man with wire-rimmed glasses who always smelled like peppermint. "As you know," Mr. Peterson began, "Eleanor was a meticulous woman who updated her will regularly." He pulled out a document and started to read. As expected, Grandma had left me the family home and most of her assets, with some charitable donations and smaller bequests to a few old friends. I wasn't surprised. Grandma had always told me I would inherit the house. "This house has seen 5 generations of our family," she'd say, "and someday I hope it will see your children too." But then Uncle Richard cleared his throat. "Actually," he interrupted, "there has been a change." Mr. Peterson looked confused as Uncle Richard pulled a document from his briefcase. "My mother updated her will 3 months ago. She had me help her with it when Catherine was out running errands. She wanted to make sure everything was handled properly." I watched in shock as he handed over what looked like an official will. Mr. Peterson adjusted his glasses and read through it, his expression unreadable. "This appears to be in order," he said slowly. "It's notarized and signed properly." He cleared his throat and began reading. In this version of the will, Uncle Richard received the house and most of Grandma's assets. I was left only $50,000, a fraction of the estate's worth. "That's impossible," I said, my voice barely audible. "Grandma would never do that." Uncle Richard put his hand on my shoulder. His fingers felt like claws. "She was worried about you, Catherine. She didn't think you could handle the responsibility of the property. She wanted someone with business experience to manage everything." "But she never said anything to me about changing her will," I protested, looking at Mr. Peterson. "This can't be right." Mr. Peterson looked uncomfortable. "It does appear to be legally executed, Catherine. I didn't prepare it, but it has Eleanor's signature and proper witnesses." I felt like I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. This wasn't about money or property, it was about Grandma's last wishes, her legacy. It was about the home we shared, where all my memories lived. "I need some air," I said, standing abruptly. As I left the office, I heard Uncle Richard tell Mr. Peterson, "She'll be fine. She needs time to accept it." I spent the next week in a daze, sleeping in my childhood bedroom in what was now, apparently, Uncle Richard's house. He had generously told me I could stay until I figured things out, but he made it clear I needed to be out within a month. Something didn't add up. Grandma and I talked about everything, especially in those final months. She never mentioned changing her will. She never expressed any concerns about my ability to manage the estate. I started going through her things, looking for, I wasn't sure what, some explanation, some clue that this was real. In her desk drawer, I found a leather-bound journal where she kept important notes and thoughts. I'd seen her write in it countless times over the years. Flipping through the pages, I found entries from her last months. She wrote about her pain, about her hopes for me, and about the memories she cherished. Nothing about changing her will or worrying about my capabilities. Then I noticed something else. At the back of the journal was a pocket containing birthday cards I had given her over the years. She had kept every single one. I pulled them out, smiling through tears at my childish handwriting on the earlier ones. That's when I noticed it. The signature on the will that Uncle Richard produced didn't match Grandma's handwriting in her journal or on any of the cards she had signed. The differences were subtle, the way she looped her E, the slight tilt of her writing, but they were definitely there. My heart started racing. I'd worked as an archivist, handling historical documents and verifying authenticity. I knew how to spot inconsistencies in handwriting. This wasn't grief, which made me suspicious. Something was wrong. I didn't confront Uncle Richard immediately. Instead, I called in sick to the part-time job I had taken at the local library and began my own quiet investigation. I needed more evidence before making any accusations. First, I needed to see the original will again, the one Mr. Peterson had started to read before Uncle Richard interrupted. I made an appointment with Mr. Peterson, claiming I needed clarification on some points of the new will. His office was in an old converted house downtown, with creaky floors and windows that stuck in humid weather. When I arrived, his secretary said he was running late, but offered me coffee while I waited. I accepted and sat in the small reception area, surrounded by law books and framed diplomas. After she went to the break room, I noticed a stack of files on her desk. The top one had my grandmother's name on it. I quickly glanced around, no one was coming. In a moment I would later recognize as the point of no return, I slipped the file into my purse. Mr. Peterson arrived 15 minutes later, apologizing for his tardiness. I asked him vague questions about estate taxes and the timeline for receiving my modest inheritance. All the while, the stolen file felt like it was burning through my purse. "I'm sorry about all this, Catherine," he said as I was leaving. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman. I was surprised by the change myself." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and hurried out. Back in my car, I opened the file with shaking hands. Inside were copies of both wills, the original one and Uncle Richard's version. But there was something else. At the bottom of the folder was a torn document, the original will, or at least parts of it. It had been ripped apart and was clearly meant for the trash, but someone had missed these pieces when cleaning up. I carefully pieced together what I could. Even with sections missing, it was clear that the original will left me as the primary beneficiary. And most importantly, the signature on this document matched Grandma's handwriting perfectly. I had proof, or at least the beginnings of proof, that Uncle Richard had forged the new will, but I needed more. I remembered all those times Uncle Richard had visited Grandma alone, bringing paperwork. I needed to know what else he might have had her sign, or what else he might have forged. That night, after Uncle Richard and Diane had gone out to dinner with friends, I searched his home office. I knew I was crossing a line, but what he had done was so much worse. Behind his desk was a filing cabinet. Most drawers were locked, but one opened easily. Inside were folders neatly labeled with different properties that Uncle Richard managed through his real estate business. Nothing was unusual. I was about to give up when I noticed a false bottom in the drawer. My heart pounding, I removed it and found a slim file labeled Eleanor Financial. Inside were documents showing that Uncle Richard had been transferring money from Grandma's accounts to his own for years. Small amounts at first, then larger sums as her health declined. There were forged authorizations, falsified financial statements, and notes in Uncle Richard's handwriting detailing which accounts were accessible and which needed signature matching practice. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely read the papers. This wasn't just about the will. Uncle Richard had been stealing from my grandmother for years. I took photos of everything with my phone and carefully returned the documents exactly as I found them. I needed to be smart about this. If Uncle Richard realized I was investigating him, he might destroy evidence or speed up his plan to kick me out of the house. The next day, I visited the bank where Grandma had kept her accounts. I claimed I was helping to settle her estate and asked for copies of recent statements. The manager knew me from all the times I had accompanied Grandma over the years and didn't question my request. The statements confirmed what I'd found in Uncle Richard's files. Large transfers had been made to accounts I didn't recognize. I asked if they had copies of the transfer authorizations. Of course, the manager said, pulling them up on his computer. Your grandmother authorized these transfers personally. He showed me the forms with her signature. May I ask who saw her signing these? I asked, trying to sound casual. He checked the forms. It looks like Mr. Richard Mills saw most of them, along with a notary. He frowned slightly, though it's the same notary for all of them, which is a bit unusual. I asked for copies of everything, claiming it was for the estate attorney. Back in my car, I compared the signatures on these forms to the samples of Grandma's real handwriting. More forgeries. And I was willing to bet the notary was either fake or paid off. If you're listening to this and have ever suspected someone in your family might be hiding something important, trust your instincts. That nagging feeling saved me from losing everything. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to be a detective in your own family. I'd really appreciate a like on this video if my story is helping you in any way. Over the next few weeks, I pieced together the full extent of Uncle Richard's betrayal. He had been systematically draining Grandma's accounts for at least 3 years. The forged will was the final step in his plan, but I still didn't understand why he needed to steal. His real estate business appeared successful, and he and Diane lived well. I needed to understand the whole picture before I could decide what to do, so I reached out to someone who might have insights. Megan Winters, Uncle Richard's former assistant, who had left his company about a year ago. I found her on LinkedIn and sent her a message asking if we could meet for coffee to discuss a sensitive family matter. She agreed surprisingly quickly, suggesting we meet at a cafe far from Uncle Richard's office. When I arrived, Megan was already there, a petite woman in her early 40s with short brown hair and alert eyes. I've been waiting for someone from your family to contact me, she said before I had even ordered my coffee. I'm surprised it took this long. What do you mean? I asked, taken aback by her directness. Megan leaned forward. Your uncle's business has been failing for years. He's leveraged to the hilt, and he's been using client funds to cover his personal expenses. I left when I realized what was happening. I didn't want to be there when it all came crashing down. I stared at her in shock. How bad is it? Bad enough that he's been desperate for cash. I'm guessing that's why you're here. Something about your grandmother's money. I told her everything, the forged will, the transfers, what I'd discovered so far. With each detail, Megan nodded as if confirming something she already suspected. Richard was always making comments about your grandmother's money, how it should have gone to your father and then to him as the oldest son. He resented that she controlled it all. She paused. But there's something else you should know. Megan explained that Uncle Richard had been falsifying property records and investment returns. He had created a Ponzi scheme of sorts, using new clients' investments to pay returns to older clients while skimming money for himself. His entire reputation is built on fraud, she said. If this comes out, he'll lose everything, not his money, but his standing in the community. He could go to prison. Why are you telling me all this? I asked. Why help me? Megan's expression hardened. Because he tried to blame the accounting discrepancies on me when I left. He nearly ruined my career. I've been keeping records, waiting for the right moment. She pulled a USB drive out of her purse. Everything I have is on here. Bank records, falsified documents, emails where he discusses covering his tracks. I took the drive, feeling its weight in my palm. I don't know what to say. Make sure he pays for what he's done, Megan said. To your grandmother, to you, to everyone he's cheated. Armed with this new information, I had to rethink my approach. This wasn't about my inheritance anymore. Uncle Richard had built his entire life on lies and theft. The question was, what would hurt him most? Losing the money or losing his reputation? I decided it had to be both. The next phase of my investigation took me to the notary, whose stamp appeared on many of the suspicious documents. Her name was Lisa Garner, and she worked at a small legal services shop across town. When I visited, introducing myself as Alina Mills's granddaughter, Lisa's face immediately registered recognition and concern. I've been hoping someone would come, she said quietly after I explained why I was there. Your uncle has been bringing me documents for years, saying your grandmother had signed them, but she couldn't come in person due to her health. He paid extra for me not to question it. Did you know that it was illegal? I asked, trying to keep the anger out of my voice. Lisa looked ashamed. At first, I believed him. Then I got suspicious, but by then I was already involved. He made it clear that if I stopped cooperating, he would claim I had knowingly falsified everything from the beginning. Her hands trembled. I have kids. I couldn't risk losing my license. Would you be willing to make a statement about this? I asked. After a long pause, she nodded. Yes, I'm tired of being afraid of him. I left with her contact information and a promise that she would testify if needed. Another piece of the puzzle was falling into place. But the biggest shock came when I visited Grandma's longtime friend, Martha Sullivan. Martha had been named in the original will as receiving a small bequest. I wanted to ask if Grandma had ever mentioned changing her will. Martha lived in a retirement community not far from our house. When I arrived, she hugged me tightly and ushered me into her small apartment filled with plants and photos. Catherine, my dear, I've been worried about you, she said, pouring tea from a floral teapot. How are you holding up? I'm managing, I said, but I have some questions about Grandma's last few months. Martha listened as I carefully explained my suspicions without revealing everything I knew. I wanted her unbiased recollection. Alina never mentioned changing her will to me, Martha said firmly. In fact, quite the opposite. She was worried about Richard's interest in her finances. She told me she had updated her will to ensure you were protected. She paused. There's something else, dear. Something Alina asked me not to tell you until after she was gone, but with everything that's happening, I think you need to know. Martha went to her bedroom and returned with an envelope. Alina gave me this for safekeeping about a year ago. She said that if anything strange happened after her death, I should give it to you. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter in Grandma's handwriting. My dearest Catherine, it began. If you're reading this, then Martha has determined that something isn't right. I've been suspicious of Richard's behavior for some time now. He's been asking me to sign documents without explaining them fully, claiming they're routine matters for my investments. I've been pretending to go along with it while keeping copies of everything. In the bottom drawer of my jewelry box, beneath the false bottom, you'll find a key to a safe deposit box at First Coastal Bank. Everything is there. The original copies of my will, financial statements, and a record of all the documents Richard has had me sign. I've also been recording our conversations when he doesn't realize it. I never confronted him directly because I wanted to understand how far he would go. Perhaps that was foolish, but I needed to know the truth about my son's brother. Whatever happens, remember that you are the true heart of our family. Everything I have is yours, not in legal terms, but in love and spirit. Do what you must to protect what is yours. All my love, Grandma. I sat there, tears streaming down my face, feeling a mix of grief and vindication. Even from beyond the grave, Grandma was looking out for me. She had known. All those times when Uncle Richard thought he was manipulating her, she had been gathering evidence against him. She was so much stronger than anyone knew, Martha said softly, and smarter too. That night, I waited until Uncle Richard and Diane were asleep before sneaking into Grandma's old bedroom, which they had left mostly untouched while deciding what to do with her things. The jewelry box was still on her dresser. I found the false bottom and the key exactly where she said they would be. The next morning, I went to First Coastal Bank as soon as it opened. The safe deposit box contained everything Grandma had promised: original documents, financial records, and a small digital recorder with dozens of audio files labeled with dates. I listened to a few recordings in the privacy of the bank's viewing room. Grandma's voice, still strong despite her illness, calmly asked questions while Uncle Richard gave evasive answers or outright lies. There was one particularly damning conversation where he explicitly told her he was moving funds to an investment account when, in fact, as the accompanying bank statements showed, he was transferring the money to his personal account. I now have all the evidence I need, but I still face a difficult decision: go straight to the police or confront Uncle Richard first. I decided on a third option. I would build an airtight legal case and then corner him when he had no escape. I contacted Sarah Chen, a lawyer friend from college who specializes in estate fraud. After explaining the situation and showing her some of the evidence, she agreed to help me. "This is one of the clearest cases of estate fraud I've ever seen," Sarah said as we spread the documents across her office. "Your grandmother was brilliant to collect all this evidence." "What's the best approach?" I asked. "We filed an emergency petition to invalidate the fraudulent will and freeze all the assets immediately. Then we presented evidence of the broader financial crimes to the district attorney." Sarah studied me carefully. "But Catherine, you need to be prepared. This will tear your family apart. Are you sure you want to go through with it?" I thought about all the Sunday dinners where Uncle Richard had looked at me with barely concealed resentment. All the times he had made Grandma feel guilty for supporting me. The callous way he had planned to throw me out of my childhood home. "They're not my family," I said finally. "Grandma was my family, and I'm going to fight for what she wanted." Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah and I prepared our case meticulously. We had the forged will analyzed by a handwriting expert who confirmed it was not Grandma's signature. We gathered statements from the bank manager, Lisa, the notary, and Megan. We organized the financial records to show the pattern of theft. And then, as we were preparing to file our petition, I discovered something that changed everything. I was reviewing some old family photos, looking for pictures of Grandma's signature on birthday cards and letters for more handwriting samples. In a box of old photographs, I found an envelope of pictures I'd never seen before. They were from before I was born, photos of my father and Uncle Richard as young men. One photo in particular caught my eye. It showed my father looking upset, standing next to a young woman I didn't recognize. Uncle Richard was in the background, watching them with a strange expression. I turned the photo over. On the back, in Grandma's handwriting, was written, "James, Linda, and Richard, the day everything changed, 1986. Linda. I don't know any Linda in our family history." I called Martha immediately. "Martha, do you know who Linda is? I found a photo of her with my dad from 1986. The silence on the other end of the line was telling. "Martha, are you there?" "Oh, Catherine," she finally said. "I didn't think Alina would have kept those photos. Linda was your father's first fiancée before he met your mother." My dad was engaged before. This was completely new information to me. "Yes, but they broke up very suddenly. It was all rather mysterious. One day they were planning their wedding, and the next, Linda had left town, and your father was devastated. 6 months later, he met your mother." "What happened with Linda? Why did she break up?" Martha sighed. No one knew for sure. There were rumors that she'd had an affair, but your father never believed it. He thought someone had driven her away, but he couldn't prove anything. Something about this story nagged at me. I went back to the digital recorder from Grandma's safe deposit box. There were dozens of files I hadn't listened to yet. I started going through them one by one. In a recording from about 2 months before Grandma died, when she was very weak, I found what I was looking for. Uncle Richard had come by, thinking Grandma was heavily medicated and not fully alert. He didn't realize she had activated her recorder under her blanket. "You know, Alina," his voice came through clearly, "James never deserved your favoritism. He was weak, always letting his heart rule his head." "My sons were different," Grandma's voice was faint but lucid. "But I loved them both." "Did you? It never seemed that way. James got the better education, the connections, the girlfriend." There was a pause, and then Grandma spoke. "You mean Linda?" Uncle Richard's laugh was cold. "You remember her, do you? Pretty Linda, who should have seen that I was the better brother. But no, she chose James, just like everyone else did." "Richard, that was 40 years ago." "And I fixed it, didn't I? Told her all about James's little indiscretions that never happened. Showed her the fake love letters I wrote. Drove her away so completely that James never found her again." His voice had a triumphant edge. "And then he settled for Catherine's mother instead." I felt like I'd been punched. Uncle Richard had deliberately destroyed my father's relationship with the woman he loved. My father had settled for my mother. Was that why their marriage had always seemed strained? Why there was always tension underneath the surface? "That was cruel, Richard." Grandma's voice is stronger now. "You hurt your brother deeply." "He took everything else from me," Uncle Richard snapped. "You always loved him more. Dad always respected him more. He got the looks, the charm, the easy life. Linda was mine first, did you know that? We dated in high school. But as soon as James showed interest, she dropped me like I was nothing." The recording continued, revealing decades of resentment and jealousy. Uncle Richard had been competing with my father their entire lives, and in his mind, he had always come up short. When my parents died in a car accident, Uncle Richard saw it as some kind of cosmic justice. And when Grandma took me in, his resentment transferred to me, the living reminder of the brother who had taken everything from him. This wasn't about money. This was about a lifetime of perceived slights and a twisted desire for revenge that had extended even to me, his niece, an innocent child. I felt sick listening to it, but it also strengthened my resolve. Uncle Richard hadn't stolen money and property. He had tried to steal my history, my understanding of my own family. I added the recording to our evidence file. Sarah agreed it showed Uncle Richard's character and long-standing pattern of deception, which would help our case. The day before we planned to file our petition, I received an unexpected call from Diane, Uncle Richard's wife. She asked if we could meet privately at a cafe downtown. Curious and cautious, I agreed. Diane was already seated when I arrived, a cup of coffee cooling in front of her. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes and her normally perfect blonde hair looking slightly disheveled. "Thank you for coming, Catherine," she said as I sat down. "I'll get straight to the point. I know what you've been doing. I know you've been investigating Richard." My heart raced, but I kept my expression neutral. "What makes you say that?" "Because I've been investigating him too," she said, surprising me completely. "For different reasons, but I think we've probably discovered many of the same things." She opened her purse and pulled out a small stack of papers. "Bank statements," she explained. "Accounts I never knew existed, women's names I didn't recognize, hotel receipts, jewelry purchases." She looked up at me, her eyes hard. "Your uncle has been cheating on me for years, Catherine, and using money he stole from your grandmother to finance it." This was yet another twist I hadn't expected. "I'm sorry," I said genuinely. Whatever I thought of Diane, no one deserved that kind of betrayal. "Don't be, I've made my own mistakes in this marriage." She straightened her shoulders. "But I draw the line at becoming an accomplice to fraud. I found your notes in the guest room where you've been staying. You left them in the desk drawer." I silently cursed myself for the careless mistake. And you're not here to stop me." "No," Diane said firmly. "I'm here to help you. Richard thinks I'm still the dutiful, oblivious wife. He doesn't know that I've copied his files, recorded his phone calls, tracked his meetings with people who have helped him commit these crimes." She slid a USB drive across the table. "Everything I have is yours. Use it." I stared at her in shock. "Why would you do this?" Diane's smile was sad. "Because 30 years ago I was friends with Linda, your father's first fiancée. I knew what Richard did to break them up, but I was so in love with him that I convinced myself he had good reasons. I've been paying for that moral compromise ever since." She stood up, gathering her purse. "It's time I finally did the right thing." As she turned to leave, I called after her. "What will you do now?" She looked back, and for the first time since I'd known her, Diane's expression seemed peaceful. "I filed for divorce this morning. By the time Richard realizes what's happening, I'll be long gone." She gave a small smile. "I have family in Arizona, but he doesn't know about them. I'm going to start over." With Diane's additional evidence, our case was ironclad. The next morning, Sarah and I filed our petition to invalidate the fraudulent will and freeze all assets related to Grandma's estate. We also turned over evidence of the broader financial crimes to the district attorney's office. Everything moved quickly after that. The court granted our emergency petition within hours. Uncle Richard's accounts were frozen. The district attorney launched a formal investigation into his business practices. I decided it was time for a confrontation. I asked Uncle Richard to meet me at Grandma's house, technically still his house under the fraudulent will, but not for much longer. He arrived looking irritated. "Catherine, I'm very busy. What's this about?" I led him to the living room where I had arranged all my evidence on the coffee table. Copies of the forged will with the handwriting analysis, bank statements showing his theft, statements from Lisa, the notary, and Megan, his former assistant, and printed transcripts of Grandma's recordings. "What is all this?" he asked, his irritation shifting to confusion. "This is the truth, Uncle Richard, all of it." As I explained each piece of evidence, I watched his face change, from confusion to anger to panic, and finally, to a cold calculation as he tried to find a way out. "You're making serious accusations based on circumstantial evidence," he said, his lawyerly voice taking over. "This would never hold up in court." I played one of Grandma's recordings, the one where he explicitly admitted to transferring her money to his own accounts. His face went pale. "The court already granted an emergency petition this morning," I said calmly. "All of Grandma's assets are frozen. The district attorney is reviewing evidence of your financial crimes as we speak, and Diane has provided documentation of how you used the stolen money." At the mention of his wife, Uncle Richard's composure finally broke. "Diane, what are you talking about?" "She knows everything, about the fraud, about the affairs. She's gone, Richard. She's filed for divorce and left town." He sank onto the couch, suddenly looking old and defeated. "You have no idea what you're doing, Catherine. The people who trusted me with their investments, their life savings." "You should have thought about that before you started stealing," I said, unmoved. "Before you tried to steal my inheritance, before you forged Grandma's will." He looked up at me, and for a moment, I saw the uncle who used to bring me birthday presents, who taught me to ride a bike when I was 10. But that man had been consumed by jealousy and greed long ago. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "Money, is that it? I can pay you what the will would have left you." I shook my head. "It's too late for that. This isn't about money. It's about justice for Grandma, for my parents, even for Linda." At the mention of Linda's name, his eyes widened. "What do you know about Linda?" "Everything," I said. "I know you sabotaged my father's relationship with her. I know your jealousy of him transferred to me after he died. I know you've spent your entire life trying to take what belonged to others because you never believed you deserved anything on your own merits." Uncle Richard's face contorted with a mixture of rage and shame. "You have no right to judge me. You have no idea what it was like growing up in James's shadow. Everything came easily to him. Everyone loved him best." "That may be true," I acknowledged. but it doesn't justify what you've done, and now you're going to face the consequences." As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. Sarah had arrived with the court-appointed executor who would be taking control of the estate pending the final ruling. Uncle Richard looked from me to the door, suddenly understanding the full extent of what was happening. "You called them here. Now, you set me up." "No, Uncle Richard, you set yourself up. Every forged signature, every stolen dollar, every lie, those were your choices." The next few weeks were a blur of legal proceedings. The court invalidated the fraudulent will and recognized the original one as legitimate. Uncle Richard was arrested and charged with many counts of fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. His real estate business collapsed as clients discovered he had been misappropriating their investments for years. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the prominent businessman's fall from grace. Old friends and business associates distanced themselves. The man who had spent his life obsessed with his reputation and standing in the community lost it all in a matter of days. I testified at his criminal trial, presenting the evidence Grandma had collected along with my own findings. It was difficult facing him across the courtroom, seeing the hatred in his eyes. But I remembered what he had done, not to me, but to my father, to Grandma, to everyone who had trusted him. The jury found him guilty on all counts. The judge, citing the calculated nature of his crimes and the betrayal of family trust, sentenced him to 15 years in prison. After the trial, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Linda Peterson, my father's first fiancée. Martha had managed to track her down and tell her what had happened. "Dear Catherine," she wrote, "I can't express how shocked I was to learn the truth after all these years. Your father was the love of my life, and I have spent decades wondering what went wrong between us. To discover it was all a deliberate deception is both painful and, strangely, a relief. I've enclosed a photo of your father and me that you might want to have. He was a wonderful man who deserved far better than the brother who betrayed him. I see from Martha's stories that his daughter has his integrity and courage. He would be so proud of you." Enclosed was a photo of my father, young and smiling, with his arm around a beautiful woman with kind eyes. They looked so happy, so full of hope for their future. A future Uncle Richard had stolen from them. I moved back into Grandma's house, my house now, and began the process of rebuilding. The first thing I did was donate a significant part of the estate to a foundation that helps victims of fraud reclaim their lives. It felt like something Grandma would have wanted. 6 months after Uncle Richard went to prison, I received a letter from him. I almost threw it away unopened, but I decided that whatever he had to say, I could handle it. "Catherine," he wrote in a shaky hand, "I don't expect forgiveness, nor do I deserve it. But I want you to know that in the quiet of my cell, with everything stripped away, I finally see clearly what I've done. To Alina, to your father, to you. Jealousy poisoned my entire life, and I let it turn me into someone I never thought I'd become. The house should always have been yours. It was your home long before it was ever mine. I'm sorry. Richard." I folded the letter and put it away in a drawer. Perhaps someday I would find it in my heart to forgive him, but that day was not today. Standing in the garden Grandma had loved so much, watching the sunset paint the old walls of our family home in shades of gold, I felt her presence around me. She had protected me one final time, reaching out from beyond with the evidence I needed to reclaim my birthright. "I did it, Grandma," I whispered to the evening air. "I protected what's ours like you asked me to." In the end, the greatest inheritance wasn't the house or the money. It was the strength Grandma had shown in her final act of love, meticulously documenting Uncle Richard's crimes even as she was dying, ensuring I would have what I needed to fight back. She'd always told me that family was the most important thing in life. She was right, but not in the way I once thought. True family isn't always about blood. It's about who loves you enough to protect you, even when they're no longer there to see the battle. I was her legacy. Not the house, not the money. Me. And I would make sure that legacy was one of integrity, strength, and justice, the very qualities she had shown until the end. If this story touched you in any way, Please consider subscribing to this channel for more true family stories that show both the darkness and light of human relationships. Your support means everything to those of us who share our most painful experiences in hopes of helping others. Thank you for listening to my journey.